Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, I'll give people a few minutes to enter the room and to get settled. Now is a great time to grab a piece of paper and a pen. If you don't have one yet, there's going to be a lot of really great information in this presentation. So maybe have something to take some notes. We will also have time for questions at the end. I do have the Q&A box open. It's best to put questions in the Q&A box because other folks can see and upvote your questions. That way, at the end, when we take some time to do Q&A, we can know which questions are the most pertinent for everyone who is here with us. So before we get started, I would love to hear where everyone is calling in from, their country of citizenship, and if there's anything else about you that you want us to know. Of course, this presentation is going to be focused on folks from North America, specifically the US and Canada. But if you have any particular circumstances, feel free to let us know and we can try to address anything that would be relevant for you. So again, welcome to everyone who's just joining us now. Take a moment to grab a piece of paper and a pencil because we will have a lot of really great information. The session will be recorded, so don't worry about that. You can review it again later. My name is Lindsay. I am head of community and events for Outsite. Outsite is a global network of about 50 different co-living and co-working spaces around the world, including North America, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. So today we're going to talk about the digital nomad visa for Portugal, where we have 5 different locations. I think it's 5. I've been to almost all of them, and so I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about our Portuguese locations or about Outsite in general. But I know you're all here to talk about the digital nomad visa, so we'll get started in just a few moments. So I'm checking the chat right now to see we have a lot of folks calling in, American citizens, British citizens, US, currently in Mexico with a Canadian citizen. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see some familiar faces here. So thanks for letting us know in the chat where you're calling in from and what citizenship you hold. Again, the Q&A box is going to be open. It is the best place to put your questions. We'll save time for questions at the end. And you can keep an eye on the Q&A box because you can upvote questions that you want to be answered. We'll save some time at the end to do that. So we're going to get started. Oh, I see that someone has their hand raised. Chris, do you want to write in the chat box the question that you had for me? Or if you have a comment that you want to add, the chat box is open and you can make sure it's set to everyone or host and panelists, depending on what your question is. Okay. So I don't want to take up too much time because I know we have a ton of great information to go over today about the digital nomad visa for Portugal. So we're going to get started quickly. Again, Q&A box is open. We'll save time for questions at the end. So as we're going through this presentation, you think of something, put it in the Q&A box and others can upvote and we'll make sure to get as many questions as we possibly can answered for you. So one final introduction from me. I'm Lindsay, head of community and events for Outsite. We have about 50 different co-living and co-working locations around the globe. And we also have community perks and events just like this one for digital nomads, remote workers, entrepreneurs, creatives, anyone who's interested in the remote work lifestyle is welcome as well. And I'm here with Gleb, who's going to introduce himself and get started on the presentation. So Gleb, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Gleb Ukelis. I am one of the co-founders and creators of the digitalvisa.co or the Digital Visa Portugal group. First of all, thank you, Lindsay, for allowing us and the Outside team for allowing us an opportunity to speak with everyone. And thank you for all the people joining us for taking the time of your busy day to listen to us. Normally I would ask where everybody's from, but I think Lindsay took care of that already. So that's one less thing we have to do. Basically, a little bit about me. basically, and our story. I'm originally from New York City, originally a banker in a former life. I during my tenure in Wall Street, I spent a lot of time traveling in Asia and Australia for work, many visas in the process. Um, when uh, Throughout my travels, I've never actually been to Europe until when I was 31. Uh, I remember being extremely annoyed with the fact that I had to fly from New York to a meeting in Spain, and it was an 8-hour flight, and then I had a meeting at 3 o'clock. I'm sorry, 10 a.m. in New York the next day. And long story short, I remember the meeting wasn't the greatest, but I remember coming out, and taking a look at everybody around me and realize that people are just sitting around drinking coffee during the day with seemingly nobody running around like we did in New York um, to go to work. People were just drinking their wine, having their coffee, and seemingly enjoying the day and the beautiful weather. Um, Although the experience was short, it definitely planted a seed in my head that there's a different way to live. When I got back to the US, I couldn't shake the idea, and basically 2 years later, I had sold my company and left to travel in Europe. I spent a year in Spain because I speak Spanish, thinking that that's where I would settle. But Spain is an amazing country, but I couldn't really call it home. Then I lived in Germany. I spent about a year in Croatia, a year in Morocco, a year in Serbia. Basically, I spent about 5.5, 6 years traveling around looking for a place to settle until I found Lisbon. I fell in love with Lisbon right away. It has all the conveniences of a big city, but is like, I guess we call it the smallest big city out there. Also, Lisbon is proud to claim to be one of the cheapest Schengen capitals. So if you're looking for a big city or a metropolitan place to live, Lisbon is highly recommended. And I mean, basically, I love Portugal, and which I guess will take us to the next slide, and our story. So a little bit about me. Basically, what I realized while traveling and during my very difficult relocation to Portugal is that like every system, every immigration service, every border control in every country is run on a set of rules. And like everything else, depending on how robust the system is, meaning how many people they have and what their requirements are, if you are a little bit experienced and understand, you can basically figure out some rules can be broken, some rules can be bent. Other rules must be obeyed. And that's a very important point to understand, because no attorney will really tell you this, but experience has shown us that part of a successful immigration application is to understand where and how you could play around with certain things. And we'll get into those details during the course of the presentation. But basically, if you look at the slide, we started originally just working with the US, but we've since expanded into the Canadian, South American, and UK market. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And this is from a scene from one of my favorite movies, The Keymaker, who is basically who in the Matrix says some rules can be bent, some rules can be broken. And that is really the story of at least in Portugal. Not only the story of life, but the story of specifically the immigration system. Okay. So today's agenda, we're going to cover the advantages of Portugal, cost of living, rent, lifestyle, etc., requirements and time frame for the application, the frequent misconceptions of people when applying, specifically from the US. Again, this presentation is geared towards the North American US market. That being said, if you have any questions about any of the other countries that we work with, please please send your comments to info@digitalvisa.eu, and at the end of the presentation, I'll provide a QR code for you guys to schedule a consultation. If not with the North American group, we have a team for basically every market that we work with, so you can speak to the professionals in that market depending on what your questions are. If I cannot answer. Number 4, we'll cover the options for obtaining digital visa, particularly from your home country versus arriving in Portugal and then filing the paperwork here, which is a process that is less known. By the way, just the website is www.digitalvisa.co. I'm answering a question in the Q&A. And we'll do the visa process step by step, and we'll follow up with a question and answer at the end. Okay, guys, let's rock and roll. So advantages of living in Portugal. As a former economist, .co, digitalvisa.co. Ash. So guys, as an economist, one of the things that drew me to Portugal is the cost of living. Basically, including rent, your money will go as an average 2 times farther in Portugal, and the cost of living is about 50%. So depending on where you live, your dollar will be 4 to 1 here. If you have questions about how that number is gathered, or if you have questions about specific costs of anything, please let us know, and we can have either a tax specialist or myself, or depending on what country you're from, give you a cost analysis of what life would look like in Portugal. Here on the next slide, you will see a comparison of T1s and T3s in New York City, Toronto, Lisbon, Porto, and Peniche. For those of you that don't know, Lisbon, of course, is the capital. Porto is the second largest city, and Peniche is a very popular surf town. We put that in the slides just so you can see, if you want to live outside a metropolitan area, kind of in a beach town, what that looks like. Okay. By the way, the information is gathered from like Idealista and local real estate databases. We'll go to the next slide. Here you have an example of a house in the US. This is a studio in the center of Manhattan, renting for 1,750 USD. The size, and I know this because I lived in Manhattan, so this is actually, in my opinion, a little bit cheap, but the studio is about 400 square feet, or roughly 35 square meters. In comparison, and it's unfurnished. In comparison, you have an apartment in Lisbon, in the center of Lisbon, fully furnished for 800 square feet, or 71 meters, right in the center of Lisbon, T2, not a studio, almost 2.2 times the size of the US apartment, and cheaper than the price. So this is what you can look for in the housing market. In addition, Portugal offers a very friendly English-speaking proficiency, claiming to have 70% of the population at least proficient enough to speak in English. And I will tell you that in Lisbon, I would say in Lisbon and Porto, then that number is probably higher. Probably somewhere in the small towns, it's a little bit lower, but the average is about 70%. Portugal offers unrestricted travel to 26 European countries without border controls. Endless sunshine of claiming, well, statistically, we have 300 plus days of sunshine and 850 kilometers of beaches. Basically, anywhere you are, you're about 10 minutes from the beach at any time. So if you're looking for that, you can enjoy yourself here. Okay. Domestic requirements for the digital visa. Okay. The requirements from the American side include a valid travel document or passport. Okay. The passport should be valid. up to from 6 months after you plan to leave Portugal. And a question that I always ask my clients here is your intention to live in Portugal forever, meaning to relocate to Europe, because that is a separate conversation. If your intention, this presentation is geared towards people who are looking to come here for 1 to 5 years. If you plan to stay longer, you should definitely talk to us, and there is a different strategy for that. But as our experience, so most digital nomads usually arrive for 3 years or less. So if your situation is different, please let us know, and we'll explain to you how to go about that. But as generally as a rule, after 5 years, you can apply for citizenship, permanent residency, or a passport if you stay for 5 years, 183 days in the country or more. Okay, but again, if your intention is to stay here for more than 3 years, you should contact us separately, and we will advise you how to do that. But back to the presentation, for most digital nomads, valid passport valid for 6 months after departure, criminal background check. In the American case, it's from the FBI with a Hague apostille from the State Department. Those of you who don't know what a Hague apostille is, it's basically an international notary issued by any country that's part of the Hague Convention, and basically makes a document issued by one foreign power valid in a different jurisdiction. For example, an American document issued by the United States government must be, for it to be valid in Europe, must have a Hague apostille. Likewise, any European document issued by European government should have a Hague apostille to be valid in the US. Okay, for those of you, if you don't know how to do that, please contact us. We can walk you through the process. Proof of income, the equivalent of 3,280 euros per month, which is equivalent to 4 times the average Portuguese wage. So obviously the Portuguese are looking for wealthy individuals, or what they consider to be wealthy. And what they consider to be wealthy is roughly 34 to 3,500 USD per month, which is the equivalent currently of 3,280 euros per month. Okay, they verify this via 90 days of bank statements and either W-2 or 1099, depending on your situation. And the final requirement is the declaration of intent to engage in remote work, or to put simply, a remote work agreement, basically permission from your company with allowing you to be in Portugal and keep your job. Portugal's biggest fear is that, and by the way, all the numbers that I'm talking about are gross. Portugal, the requirements are all gross, pre-tax. Okay, Portugal does not look at post-tax numbers. So basically, it's very important here to understand that the Portugal considers itself not a wealthy nation, and the digital visa or the D visas of any kind are a fundraising tool. So the biggest fear that Portugal has is that you arrive here without, for whatever reason, whether you don't have permission from your job to be here, or somehow you arrive here and you are left here without any income, and you are forced to go on the Portuguese social services system. That is the biggest fear, and that is the biggest concern that we face when submitting the applications. The ideal situation for Portugal, of course, is that you come here with a job outside the country, not compete with the Portuguese workforce for jobs, simply bring money into the economy, work outside of the country, make your money outside of Portugal, live here, spend some money, taxes on goods, etc., but bring money in without taking anything out. Okay, that is, by the way, the picture that we try to paint whenever we do an application. Whenever we do, to basically make sure that the applicant looks steady and there is no concern that they will be supported by Portugal. And just so you guys, I'm just reading the chat. As far as self-employed individuals, usually you can simply bank statements, or if you are a private contractor, a 1099 with bank statements is enough. And the goal again is 3,500 USD or more. So it doesn't matter if you're self-employed, W-2, 1099, company, or even an international, as long as your paycheck is the equivalent of gross 3,500 or more, you're good to go. Okay. On the Portuguese side, because remember, when you're applying from the US, you need US documents, and certain things must be obtained for you on the Portuguese side. You will need to request a Portuguese NIF number or Portuguese taxpayer ID number. You will also need to request a Portuguese NISS or NIS, or the Portuguese Social Security number. And you will have to provide proof of accommodations for 1 year. Now, the accommodations could be with a friend. You are allowed to stay with someone you know, as long as they acknowledge that you're staying with them. You can obviously rent a place or an apartment, or from outside, a co-living facility for 1 year, or however, or we could set up a virtual address for you. Okay. Again, depending on your situation, and why the virtual address is set up is a lot of people want to come to Portugal, but they don't want to stay in one place. So this allows them the flexibility of receiving mail at a location while enjoying the country, if your goal is to travel while you're here. Okay. Again, obviously everybody's situation is different, and these questions are very unique to each person's application. So in terms of address and whether you have to live there or you're allowed to travel, I definitely strongly recommend that you speak with us in detail so we can address those questions appropriately and make sure they're geared to your application specifically. Official timeframes from the US. Okay. Now it's important to understand here. We're going to explore both sides. What applying from the US looks like, and what coming to Portugal and applying from Portugal looks like. So currently, now it's also very important before we get into this to understand that you will read many things online. Portugal is undergoing a transformation because their digital visa program is overprescribed. Originally, the expectation was 40 applications. When the program started, they're close to over 800 applications a month. There's not enough staff. It's kind of like going to the DMV and waiting there all day. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the DMV. It's kind of like what the Portuguese did. So basically, what the timeframes look like currently from the US. Okay, this slide is particularly for the US. In the US, the Portuguese consulate does not see people. So they outsource that face-to-face meeting to a company called VFS. Okay. VFS Global is a paperwork aggregator that works to collect the documents for the Portuguese consulate in the US. So if you were to ask for an appointment today, you would probably receive one in 2 to 3 months with VFS. You will prepare the documents and then submit them to VFS Global. Processing time on their website, they claim 3 to 4 months, but we're seeing close to 6 months right now, because again, everything is overprescribed. And what they do is they collect your documents, send it to Washington, D.C. with your passport. You must remember they will take your passport. If you apply in the US, you must give up your passport. They will send it to Washington, D.C. to the head consulate of Portugal in the US. They will review your documents. They will send back the file with the passport, hopefully approved, and a 4-month temporary visa, giving you 4 months to present yourself in Portugal in front of IMA, or what used to be called CEF, to do the biometric scan and set up the appointment. Now, in that time frame, you're also expected to obtain your NIF and NIS. Okay. If the process seems a little bit complicated, it's because it is. Okay. And there is nothing easy. And guys, so this is but not everything is a piece of cake. Sometimes it's like eating soup with a fork. So basically, frequent misconceptions about how the process actually works. On the Portuguese side, CEF is restructuring to IMA. Basically, in an effort to ease the process and avoid delays, CEF, which is the current border control system, is restructuring itself to IMA to hopefully make the process easier. In typical Portuguese style, the result is kind of the opposite. Their restructuring is causing delays. Their social security system crashes on a regular basis. We're constantly facing cultural challenges, which is we expect things to be done quick. The Portuguese always say mañana, mañana, mañana. And basically, we are, that is, documentation errors sadly are common. And because of the constant changes, there's definitely a lack of transparent guidelines. To that, I just want to say anything you read online that's more than 2 weeks old should be considered outdated. New changes are coming out every 2 weeks, and we're being updated on them as they come out because they are trying to make the system better. So anything you read online about the submission process to Portugal, more than 2 weeks old, should be double checked, or at least, basically, in my opinion, it should be considered outdated. If something is more than 2 weeks old, it is, in my opinion, no longer valid, or at the very least, should be double checked with either an attorney, accountant, advisor, or somebody. Okay. From the US side, VFS is also overwhelmed. That's why you have a 2 to 3 month wait for appointments, extended wait for approvals, which the process should take 90 days. We're seeing 6 months. Okay, that's just to get your passport back. Okay, unusual requests from the Portuguese side. We're seeing things like they want you to get a NIF number or a NIS number, which is very unexpected, never used to take place, but they're requesting it sometimes prior to going to the consulate, making the process almost impossible. Okay. So this is me when I started my digital nomad process, and this is me during it, once I realized what's actually happening. So here, and this is where we offer creative solutions. Applying for the digital visa from your home country provides the opportunity to complete the process prior to arrival, meaning you get a stamp in your visa, and then in the Portuguese case, you still have to deal with the bureaucracy of scheduling the IMA appointment and getting the numbers. So basically, but prior to the changes that are happening now, the process was in fact designed so you can almost secure your visa prior to arrival to the country. The manifestation of interest is primarily used by individuals who arrive in Portugal without a residency visa, meaning not going through the consulate, and then want to establish legal residency in Portugal after arrival. For example, you come to Portugal on the 90-day tourist visa with an American passport, you love the country, and you decide to stay. This is what we specialize in, because in our opinion, the road through the consulate is extremely difficult right now, and most people, most of our clients want to be here in 3 to 4 months. That is simply not possible with the consulate. That being said, of course, our staff is very well equipped to handle the process with the consulate. And if you guys need advice on that, we will be more than happy to do so. But the main difference is if you apply in the US or in your home country, you will have to wait there for the approval. If you apply in Portugal, you are allowed, the 90-day restriction is lifted, and that you are allowed to stay here until your visa is granted, and are given the same basically privileges as a visa holder. Okay, so if the goal is to enter Portugal as quickly as possible, the manifestation of interest should definitely be considered. And a very interesting question that was just asked in the group chat: can you leave Portugal? You definitely can. There are no border controls in Europe at all. With an American passport, you are allowed to travel to your home country. and you are allowed to travel anywhere where the American passport allows you to go. However, from a legal perspective, the manifestation of interest or the visa to Portugal is just the visa to Portugal. There are no border controls in Europe. So even though the visa is not for Spain, for example, you are allowed to enter Spain. Nobody will check. But you should be aware that the reason why the address is requested, you must have ties to Portugal. And that is where the address comes into play. Now, you can have an address in Portugal and not really be there. That is, nobody can check that, but you should be aware that the manifestation is a document for the right to be in Portugal. The American passport gives you the right to be anywhere the American passport allows you to be. The manifestation will give you coming and going privileges to Portugal while you wait for the visa. Okay, next slide. So step by step, one more time from the US. Step one, make an appointment with VFS Global. While you're waiting for the appointment, prepare your documentation. 3 months later, you will submit the application. Step four, wait for the approval. Step five, 4 to 6 months later, you will get the 4-month temporary visa, which gives you 4 months to come to Portugal and present yourself in front of IMA. Step 6, arrive in Portugal, wait for IMA appointment. And just to be very clear, one of the biggest problems we're seeing is that IMA cannot accommodate the 4-month time frame. So what's happening is people are coming to Portugal with the 4-month temporary visa, and that visa is expiring. Okay, now certain exemptions are being made because IMA acknowledges that it cannot fulfill its own obligations. So of course, you will not be kicked out of the country, but that is something you should be aware of, okay? And that situation affects people differently, especially depending on passports, work situation, and accommodation. So that is definitely something that should be discussed with our staff based on your individual situation, okay? And step 8, God willing, you get your plastic card, which is like a driver's license or the Visa card. Visa process step by step from Portugal. Okay. Basically, this is just so you guys know, we would do both options. We would do everything for you, or you can do this yourself. But if you were to do it yourself, you would arrive in Portugal, obtain your NIF, obtain your NIS, and just so you understand, the NIF takes about, according to the internet right now, it says 3 to 5 business days. Our experience is 7 to 10. Again, everything is delayed because of the over prescription of the visa process. Step 2 is obtain your NIS or Portuguese social security number. That'll take, says 7 to 10 business days, but we're seeing 3 to 4 weeks. Again, there are people that will fly through the process in 2 days, and there are people that will get stuck. Okay, there's simply just no way, sadly, to control that. But our goal is, when we handle an application, our goal is to handle this and prepare you for the worst case scenario and take care of the problems for you. But if you're doing this yourself, you should be aware that delays will happen. Okay, step 3, once you have your NIS, is to obtain your background check from your whole country. Something to keep in mind, the FBI background check is valid for 90 days from the time of issuing. Okay, in the US, it's valid for 12 months. Portugal will validate it for up to 90 days. Okay, so if you're, for example, if you pull your background check January 1st, it will expire for Portuguese immigration standards by March 31st. Okay. Step 4, and in Portugal, you prepare the rest of your documents. You submit the manifestation of interest, and in Portugal, you can wait for your appointment instead of waiting for it in the US. Okay. Flying from Portugal versus your home country. Okay. Now, basically, we have here IMA as a haunted house where things get lost because sometimes applications simply seem to disappear there. We are constantly on the phone with them, constantly monitoring the applications. But if you're doing this yourself, you must be ready for the fact that there is a very high probability that they will misplace or misfile some portion of the application. And again, this is not because they are trying to do this on purpose. It is simply, they have one person doing the job of three. Okay, they're trying to hire, trying to fix the problem, but right now they are simply overworked, underpaid, and understaffed. Okay. How much does it cost to apply for the digital visa? If you do it yourself, start to finish, the fee with the FBI background check and the processing fees in Portugal will run you between 500 and 700 USD or euros, depending on from where you pay. Okay, this is if you do it yourself. Our firm charges, again, depending on the situation, depending if per traveler, between 2,000 and 3,000 euros, 50% upfront, 50% upon successful submission. Okay. Where do I pay taxes as a digital nomad holder? This is a question we get a lot. So again, here is something, the question that should be asked here is, do you plan on visiting Portugal for several years, or do you plan to live here forever? If you plan on visiting Portugal for a couple of years, our recommendation is to make things easier for your employer. Their HR is to continue to pay taxes in the US. But again, we have tax attorneys that will review your documents properly. This is a hypothetical question. Not every situation is different. And we encourage you to definitely ask one of the legal professionals before making that decision. Also, I'm sure you have your accountant who can advise you appropriately. Is it possible to bring my family with me on the digital nomad visa? Yes, it is. Through a process called family reunification. The digital, this is designed for if your spouse or if you have children does not work. Meaning, for example, either a spouse with a partner that is not making 3280, the person who is supporting the family must make 50% more than the required. For example, so 3280 is required, plus another 50% for a spouse, and plus 30% per child. So let's call it an extra 1,000 per child and an extra 1,600 per spouse. Here we've included the QR code. So if any of the information was gone through too quickly, or if you have questions that have not been answered or will not be answered during the Q&A, please use the QR code, our website, or our email to schedule a consultation with one of our advisors, and we will address all your questions specifically as they are geared towards you. Okay, let's ask some questions.
Gleb, thank you so much. That was a lot of really great information. I really appreciate it because it's nice to see it laid out like that. It's really helpful. We do have a lot of questions. So as a reminder, everyone, you can head over to the Q&A box and upvote any questions that you want to get answered. I'm going to just start in order of the most upvoted in a moment here, and we'll go through as many as we can. We have about 20 minutes, so I'm hoping that we'll be able to get to everything. But if you haven't put your question in the Q&A box yet, take a moment to do so now. Take a moment to go through and upvote the ones that you want to hear the answer to. And I can definitely attest to what Gleb was saying about the quality of life in Portugal. I spent about 2 months there in Portugal in January and February, and found that I was able to live a really nice quality of life. A glass of wine was just a few euros. Dining out was incredible. The food is amazing, and it's relatively inexpensive, especially if you come from a bigger city in the US. The south of Portugal, while I was there in January in Sagres, had amazing weather. I was able to work outside in a t-shirt during the day. It did cool off at night a bit, but I can definitely agree with everything that Gleb was saying there. So Let's take a moment and check out what we have here in the Q&A box. So the first question that we have, Gleb, I know that you touched on that, but I think this person is looking for a little bit more clarification. For the proof of accommodation, they've heard that Portugal requires you to have an official lease where the landlord is paying taxes on it. How does the virtual address get around that?
So basically, the virtual address is registered by the landlord as it's a lease. Just to be very clear, the virtual address, what we have is so it's not like virtual. I guess you can compare it to a PO box in the US, but basically there are no post office boxes in Portugal that would be acceptable for visas. So what we've done is we've partnered up with several landlords and co-living companies that will basically rent a room to, let's say, 3 people. No one actually lives in the room, but basically the room is broken up. The cost of the room is broken up, let's say, between 3 applicants, and the owner of the facility picks up the mail, and basically a lease is issued, an actual lease is issued, it is registered, but instead of one room being rented for, let's say, 800, it is now rented for 25% of that price, but not to live, for the purposes of using the virtual address for the visa application. And the lease is registered, so it fulfills all the requirements of the Portuguese authorities, while keeping the cost, obviously, a fraction of what it would actually cost to rent the rooms. But just to be very clear, that is not our company that does this. We have a relationship with several landlords and companies that do this for us. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And the next question we have, of course, I'm not sure if you're a tax expert, so I think any tax questions have to be hypothetical. But from an expense standpoint, for the digital nomad visa in Portugal, an American citizen will be responsible for U.S. taxes, Portuguese taxes, and a leased place to live. Is that correct?
Not exactly. So if you are, so first of all, there's a non-mutual, let me start again. There's a non-mutual taxation treaty signed between the Schengen zone and the US, which prohibits a person from being double taxed. So typically, as a digital nomad or any resident of Portugal, you have the option of paying your taxes in the US or in Portugal. That decision is typically made logically based on who has the lower tax rate. Currently, Portugal, in my opinion, has a higher tax rate in the US. So unless you plan to live in Portugal, meaning you're going not to visit for a couple of years, but you are actually planning to become a citizen or a permanent resident of the country, or attempting to get your passport, then yes, you will not be double taxed. You will forego American taxes and pay the higher tax rate in Portugal, unless you qualify for one of the many tax incentives that Portugal does offer, like the NHR or other things. And that is, but I don't want to change topics, but we can definitely advise on that. If you have questions, I recommend you either email them or schedule a consultation, and an appropriate advisor will address specifically to your case the situation.
Okay, thank you for the, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, but in short, you do not have to pay taxes in both countries. That's the important point.
That's really good to know. The next question we have is from someone in the UK. They're asking, how long they take your passport for. 4 months without a passport as a digital nomad is a challenge.
Correct. So basically, now, just to be very clear, the passport is taken by Seth in the US, not, I'm sorry, VFS, sorry, VFS in the US, not in the UK. So as far as my understanding is that the UK does not outsource its, the Portuguese embassy or consulate does not outsource the meetings in the UK. So in the UK, depending on what location you go to, certain locations will ask for the passport for several weeks. Others, the bigger ones, may not. But this is something, they're also undergoing a change. So I would definitely ask that location. And my understanding in the UK, if they do take your passport, it's for a month or less. Still an inconvenience, but I would definitely recommend, if applying from the UK, not the US, that you check with that location prior to going. In the US, they take your passport everywhere.
All right. So it sounds like it's a bigger problem for folks in the US, which is unfortunate, but I think ultimately it's probably worth it to be able to stay in Portugal for an extended
Yeah,
period
and
of
just
time.
if you guys are worried about your passport, I mean, then again, there are things that could be done, and depending on your paperwork, that will limit the hold of the passport for 2 weeks or less. Okay. Also, one of the reasons a lot of people don't want their passport taken for many reasons. I personally would not want it taken either. That's why a lot of people do apply from Portugal, because then they could hold on to their passport, and also gives you the flexibility of being in Europe already. Sorry.
Awesome, thank you. So the next question is the NHR still a thing? This person is unofficially living in Portugal since December 2023, but they don't have an official address, so they're still considered a taxpayer in their home country.
So, well, unofficially, those are a lot of hidden words. Can I understand? So basically, the person is residing in Portugal without a lease, but paying taxes in their home country. Can I ask what country that person is from?
They don't say in it, but Julie, if you want to put in the chat what your home country is, Belgium.
Okay, so you are a Belgian passport holder, meaning a European national, correct? Yes.
Yes.
So first of all, you don't need a visa to Portugal. If you are from a European country, you do not need a visa to Portugal. As far as the NHR goes, the NHR, if you do not have a registered lease prior to December 10th, the NHR, as it sits today with the is not valid for you. Now, the NHR, which is a non-habitual tax regime, which basically caps your taxes on all foreign income at 20%, was a very popular program. However, it's being changed because to some degree, the Portuguese are not happy with internationals coming to their country and paying half the tax. They're paying 40%, you guys are paying 20%, people aren't happy. So right now, the country is redesigning the program to make it a little bit more strict, but basically, they can't really get rid of it because remember, the visa is a business for Portugal. They raise money issuing these visas. 20% of a large number is better than 40% of nothing. So when they discontinued the NHR, they're losing a huge amount of tax revenue. There's a huge discussion in Parliament to basically decide what to do about the lost revenue. They're discussing making the program eligible for highly qualified professionals, meaning IT or teachers or things like this. But the reality is nobody knows. Anybody that tells you they know what's going to happen with the NHR is simply lying, because the Portuguese government has not actually issued a response to that question yet. They claim that they will issue it on March 31st. I'd be lying if I told you I believe that. As a firm, we expect a 2 to 3 month delay on that answer because it's typical in Portugal. So we think that a realistic understanding of what the new tax code will look like will be available in June. But again, this is only really permanent if you plan to live in Portugal for more than several years, because the tax break is issued for 10 years and you will be expected to verify that you're at least in Europe 183 days.
Okay, thank you for that. I hope that was helpful, Julie. Yes, she says thanks. The next question we have here is regarding the manifestation of interest. This person has heard from other lawyers that you cannot leave Portugal by plane while waiting for your visa to process because you won't have proof in your passport that you have a visa yet. Can you please explain a little more about that?
So the manifestation of interest is absolutely not a travel document. The manifestation of interest gives you permission to be in Portugal. Permission to be in Portugal also opens up the border of the travel throughout Europe, which has no border controls. Leaving Portugal, you will use your American passport. So you cannot use the manifestation of interest as a visa to enter another country. This is true. You can use the manifestation of interest to come back into Portugal, but you will use your American passport to travel, for example, from Portugal to the US. You will use your American passport if you want to visit other countries. The manifestation of interest grants you permission in Europe, and once the visa is granted, the visa is granted immediately. Well, the manifestation of interest gives you permission to be in Portugal, as indirectly in Europe. But from a legal perspective, it is not a travel document. What gives America, and why we work with US, Canadians, and UK and South Americans, because their passport, it's on its own, allows them freedom of travel to some degree, combined with ability to enter and Europe with no 90-day restrictions, basically gives you unlimited travel. So it's important to understand the distinction. One is permission, manifestation that gives you permission to be in Europe, or particularly in Portugal, and you use your passport to travel outside of Portugal or outside of Europe. The manifestation of interest, the importance of it does depend on what passport you hold. But as I understand, most people here are from the US, UK, or Canada, so you will have no issue.
Thank you. The next question we have is, can you touch on the main differences for people from the US versus people from the UK?
In what sense?
I think they're just looking for kind of, I'll wait to see if they add a little bit of extra info in the chat, but I think they're just looking for, oh, here we go. Let's see. How does the process differ? So any major differences between applying as a US versus UK citizen?
So in terms of the manifestation of interest, and if people want to apply within Portugal, we're not seeing much of a difference at all. In terms of applying in your home country, the US is a little bit more oversubscribed, meaning the delays in the US are higher from the home country. I don't have, again, the presentation was prepared for the US market. I can ask the North American team the specifics of the time, I'm sorry, the UK team, the specifics about the UK market. But if you have specific questions other than what I've just said, then I would definitely recommend you email, and I'll have someone who handles that market address that question. But generally, it takes a little bit longer in the US because US is bigger, and there's about the same amount of consulates in the US, believe it or not, as in the UK. And those of you who know the populations can understand what that means.
Wow, that is surprising to hear. I can imagine that would create a little bit more of a bottleneck there. So thank you for answering that question. We have about 5 more minutes, so let's see if we can get through a few more of these. The next question we have is, for someone who is planning to live permanently in Portugal, would you recommend the manifestation of interest over the digital nomad visa?
Okay, just to be very clear, the manifestation of interest is the digital nomad visa. It's just the manifestation of interest is you arrive in Portugal and you're manifesting your interest to stay there, versus applying for the same visa in your home country is you're going to the consulate and you plan. Basically, the manifestation of interest is designed, you come here as a tourist, you fall in love with the country, and you decide to stay. And you demonstrate your attachment to the country by getting a domicile, and showing that you can support yourself through your income. So the question is not, well, the question is not what do we rent. The question is, where do you want to wait for your visa? In other words, you can obtain the visa both ways. The manifestation of interest gives you the option to wait for all the documents to pass through the system in Portugal, versus going to the consulate will keep you in the US. I'm assuming this person is from the US, for 6 to 8 months while you wait for the documents.
So it's really just the difference of where you are when you're applying for the digital nomad visa. Awesome.
Yes, and just so you guys know, again, remember, it's if you're gonna no matter which way you go, you still need to be in Portugal 5 years to get your residency. Okay.
The next question is from a person who travels with a pre-existing health condition that gets their travel insurance denied consistently. They need monthly services as part of their health protocol. Does Portugal and the visa get you access to healthcare? Assuming a private option is the way to go, does your organization help with that? So can you talk a little bit about what type of health insurance situation you would be in with this visa?
So I want to just be very clear on this before I answer this question. Our company or our firm does not really handle health insurance. I can answer this question from personal experience. So first, as part of the digital visa process, you are not required. The D8 or the digital visa is one of the few visas that does not require health insurance, private or otherwise, if applying from Portugal. If this is this an American gentleman or
Yes, it
yeah,
is.
if you apply from the consulate in the US, depending on the rep, and this is the problem, lack of transparency, they are entitled to ask for insurance. They're not obligated to, but they can. And there is simply no way to control it because we have seen exactly the same applications, exactly the same stuff, goes to Tom in one booth, goes to Joanne in another booth, and the answer is completely different. Okay, and that's something you guys have to understand. But from a legal, from purely a legal perspective, the D8 does not require any kind of insurance. Once you enter Portugal, you are eligible for public health care. Private health care, which is what I mean, I have private insurance. I don't know your situation, but for example, I have the highest level of insurance on the private side, and I pay $768 a year. Which
Wow.
and this includes if I want to get choppered to an airport and then flown to the US. So this is an absurd amount of coverage I carry. But
Wow, I'm quite as a U.S. citizen, quite startled by that amount. That sounds really really nice.
10 years
Um,
ago, I used to pay 500 a month for $8,000 copay under Obamacare, I remember. So 768 and gives me, I mean, the healthcare is amazing. The public healthcare is good, but the private healthcare is relatively inexpensive, as I'm sure you understand, and is extremely good.
yeah, and especially if you have a pre-existing condition that requires kind of monthly services, that might be a really good option for this person. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Let me just take a look here. Do you have any plans of supporting Spanish visas soon, or just going to stick to Portugal for now?
So we could give we could well so we've looked into the Spanish visa. One is I'm a much bigger fan of Portugal than Spain, so I also the Spanish visa is much more difficult to get. On paper, it's easier, but the difference with Portugal is they approve the visa first and then check the paperwork second. So basically, we can almost get everybody in. In Spain, they do the opposite. They check your paper, which in most countries they do this, by the way. Logically, they would check your paperwork first and then decide to let you in. In Portugal, they don't because they don't have the manpower to do that. So because we figured that out and we can exploit the system a little bit, we can almost guarantee, assuming that we review your documents and they meet the basic criteria, that we can get you in. Spain is just so you guys understand, a third of our applicants are declines from the Spanish visa. So the Spanish visa is, on paper, the requirements are easy, but in reality, it's extremely difficult to get. At least that's what we're seeing. So in short, sadly, we can give advice, even a recommendation, but no, we're not planning on doing the Spanish visa.
All right, good to know. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. But again, the contact info for Digital Visa is up here on the screen. There's a QR code, and I will also include their contact information in the post-event information that I send out, which you can expect in a few days, including the recording, contact info, so that you can get in touch with Gleb and his team if you have any more specific questions that we were not able to get to today. Again, I am Lindsay. I'm head of community and events for Outsite. We offer co-living, co-working, community and events for digital nomads, remote workers, creatives, entrepreneurs, freelancers, and anyone who's interested in this type of lifestyle. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about Outsite. Please just send me a message, reply to any of the emails that I've sent you. And a big, big thank you to Gleb and his team for spending the time with us today and answering all of these questions. Again, I really loved my time in Portugal, so I'm really excited for anyone who's considering taking the leap and applying for the digital nomad visa to spend some time in Portugal. It's a really wonderful country, and I hope that everyone gets a chance to at least visit if they don't get to apply for the digital nomad visa. But again, thank you, Gleb, so much for
But
being here with us today.
just want to say I've personally visited some of the outside facilities in Lisbon, at least, and I would have to say that they are, especially the cafes, are extremely well put together. And I would make the argument some of the best co-living facilities that I've seen in Lisbon. This is not part of the presentation, but I just wanted to say that.
Thank you
Okay.
so much. I agree. If you haven't had the chance to check out the Outside Cowork Cafe or any of the co-living spaces, they're really awesome. We have locations in Porto, in Lisbon, Cascais, Ericeira, Sagres, and Madeira, as well as other locations across Europe. You can find us online at outsite.co. And again, happy to answer any questions you have about Outsite. Just shoot me an email and we can chat. So that's all the time that we have for today. And again, thank you for spending some time with us. Gleb, thank you for being here. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of their day or evening, wherever you are in the world. And I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for coming out.